by some other folks. I think that we are streaming online. I'm looking up to the booth. Yes? All right, we are online. So if you're joining us at home, welcome at home. We were so excited this morning to have the good news brought to us by the Reverend Dr. Terrell Carter, who is back with us again to lead us in a conversation, really, about the topics that he addresses in one of his most recent books called Taking Apart Bootstrap Theology, Gospel of Generosity and Justice. Now, this is usually when I'd say more about it, but he's going to say a lot more about it. But this is going to be a bit of a conversation. So you're going to see in a moment, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to sit down there. And when it is time for conversation, I'm just going to bring the microphone around to talk in it. You are welcome to leave your mask on to talk into the microphone. You're welcome to pull your mask down. Sometimes that's a little bit easier for the microphone to pick that up to talk in the microphone. But as I mentioned this morning, Dr. Carter and I go back a few years. It's been great to be together in person. The man never sleeps because he does so much. He's been a professor, works in higher education, is a pastor, is an artist, writes a book about every 6 months, and it's unbelievable. He is... he is the superhero of the church, really is what it is. And we are just so happy to have you here. So please join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. Terrell Carter.
Thank you. It's good to see everyone again. For those who were here this morning at either of the services, thank you for your grace and your mercy and your kindness. And it is good to see all of your faces again. I want to start out with just a moment of prayer, if you all don't mind. To those who are joining us online, I also want to say welcome to you, but I invite everyone to let's stop for just a moment. Let's try to quiet our hearts and our minds. Gracious God, we are thankful for this day. We never take for granted the fact that you give us life, that you give us strength, and that you give us hope. Not just hope for today, but hope for the future. And God, we pray for you through your wisdom of your Spirit would prompt us, prick us, whatever it is today as we begin to engage in this conversation together. We want to be kingdom people. We want to do your kingdom work. Give us the courage. Give us the strength. In Jesus' name, amen. So as Pastor Eric said, this is going to be more of a conversation. I'm trying to figure out exactly where do I need to be so I can be on screen. Don't tell me that, because now I'll be going back and forth like a televangelist. So as Pastor Eric said, this is going to be more of a conversation. I don't like to stand up here and lecture at people. That is not, like, in my mind, an effective way to do these things. So this really is going to be a conversation. So I do have a presentation. I have about 24 slides. And what I'm telling you that for a reason, so everybody can be aware of where we are, what we're doing. But at any point during this conversation, stop me if you have a question. If I say something that's not clear, stop me. If you have a statement, stop me. I would rather this be an intentional, purposeful conversation versus me standing up here saying things to you all or at you all. So I said to someone this morning that this is what the process was going to be today. And here's the reason. In all the years that I've been doing this, the congregations that decide that they want to somehow participate in this kind of reconciliation, this kind of work of helping as part of this kingdom building process to restore relationships, all those things, you all already have the answers to how you can do it. The question is, do you have the courage to do it? And bringing some guy, some random dude in that is a friend of your pastor's, that's nice, but that's temporary. That's a one-day thing. You all are going to be the ones who are going to be left to try to navigate this in the real world of everyday experience here in this particular context. So again, you don't have to raise your hand. I do recognize we have multiple teachers. I'm going to rephrase that. If you want to raise your hand, raise your hand. If not, hey, Terrell, do me a favor, slow down for a second. Here goes, explain this, whatever it is, so I can know that I could stop and engage. And if you all begin to engage with each other, that's fine with me as well. Again, what I don't want this to be is something with me just standing up here talking at you all. I want this to be a conversation that we are engaging in together. And so with that being said, there we go. Thank you. This is a conversation. Again, this is not a lecture. This is a conversation. And it's based on the book, Taking Apart Bootstrap Theology, a gospel of generosity and justice. Also, as a shameless plug for a hot second, my latest book is The Gospel According to Broadway. And we can talk about that at the very end of this time together, but we have copies of that up here for anyone who would like to have one. But today is based on Taking Apart Bootstrap Theology, a gospel of generosity and justice. And the objectives of this conversation is to, number one, to talk with, not at, not past, not around each other. I'll ask this question, and I think I know what the answer is. Have we lost or have we been encouraged to ignore the art of engaging in two-way conversation and trade it in for one-way opinion sharing? I no longer, and this does not make me special, I no longer watch regular television on a daily basis. Like, I don't watch CNN News, I don't watch MSNBC, I don't watch Fox. You'll never be able to tell what my political affiliation is. But I don't watch any of those stations anymore because nobody's trying to give the news anymore. It's all just sound bites and pandering to a given, whatever, versus how do we actually share information and tell the truth in such a way that it brings people together and heals communities, heals relationships. I don't see that happening on a regular basis. I'd rather watch Food Network and Food TV than most of those. Second objective is to recognize our silos, how we likely only engage with people who think, who look, who act, who live, whose life experiences are like ours. Think about it. Where do you get the majority of your information? Anybody brave enough to answer that question? Where do you get the majority of your information? Doesn't matter if you're talking about political, local, social, whatever. Where do you get the majority of your information? Do you get it from each other? Okay. You're the first person that I've ever heard say that. Everybody else usually says, I get it from social media, not even regular media anymore. Social media. How long is a tweet now? That, 100 and how many characters? That can't tell a story. That's barely a headline. But this is where we expect somebody to tell us the truth or to tell us or to help us understand how to navigate something. It probably is unrealistic. To recognize our assumptions about people, about our nation, about our faith, in particular Christianity, and about the Bible. And I'll ask this question outside of work. How many of us spend time with people who are different from us? And I'm not even going to say or define what different is. You get to define what different is. But how many of us outside of work or when we worked or church, how many of us spend time with people who are different from us? Okay. Do you mind if I ask in what ways or what's the context? The gentleman in the back in the red shirt. Interfaith discussion. That's really intentional. And I don't say that negatively, but that's really, really intentional. Yes, ma'am. Your family, they all have various political persuasions? Okay, that's good. Yes, ma'am. And caring for or working with refugees and their families? Okay, that's really, really, really intentional. So there are 3 people out of how many in here? And I'm not putting anybody on blast. Again, I'm not saying anything negative about anyone, but that's really hard. That takes some effort. I have to get up at what time? I have to intentionally go to that requires effort for me versus I just want to live my life and I have enough to worry about with my kids, my grandkids, whatever it is, versus trying to meet some brand new group of people, some random group of strangers who I potentially could build a relationship with. How many of us are friends with people from opposing political parties, from a different nationality, from a different economic strata, from a different country, or people who follow a different faith tradition? So again, we have one person who said that. We have 2 people who said that. Okay, so we have a couple of more handfuls of people. Again, is that something that occurs naturally, or is that something that you actually have to put effort into and almost be looking for it? to be able to experience that kind of thing. All right, I'm going to give a quick history of myself. So if I say we, this is because I have a twin brother whose name is Terrell. So Terrell, I'm the oldest, 12 minutes older than Terrell. So we were born to teenage parents. Vicky, our mother, Jerry, Jerome, his nickname was Romy. Romy is our father. Our father was 18, our mother was 17 when they got pregnant and had us when she was 18 and he was 19. I can't remember, but they were teenage parents. One irony is my father's parents were teenage parents when he was born. My grandparents were pregnant with my father when they were 16 years old. I don't laugh because I think it's funny. I just laugh because it's like, oh, Lord, what were you all thinking? Clearly, they were thinking. That was the problem. But my grandparents were 16 years old when they became pregnant with my father and got married after he was born. So they became married 17 years old. They were from a place called Lilburn, Missouri. So if you are in Missouri and you take 55, like you're going to Memphis, right before you get down to the Boot Hill, there's a series of small towns that if you literally blink, you will have passed them and would not have even known that they were there. Poor, not a whole lot, not a lot of hope. My grandfather told me the story that my father, born when they were 16, about a year and a half, they had another daughter named Carlos who passed away right shortly after childbirth. Another year and a half, they had my uncle Arthur. A year and a half after that, they had my uncle named Russ. So 4 kids, 3 of them survived, and they lived in Lilburn, Missouri. And my grandfather heard about some factory in St. Louis that was potentially hiring people. So he drove the 4 hours or 3 hours from Lilburn, Missouri to St. Louis, Missouri with a suit on and some brand new Stacey Adams shoes. So for those who don't know, in the black community, black culture, especially the kind that I was raised in, Stacey Adams was the top end of footwear. So he shows up to this factory. He had only made it to 8th grade. My grandmother only made it to 8th grade. Neither one of them graduated. He shows up to this factory and they say, oh no, the job that you wanted, that really nice paying job, we've already given that away, but you can start sweeping our factory floor today if you would like. And he took his sport coat off with those Stacey Adams on and swept that factory floor. And he ended up working there for 30 plus years. And it was one of the examples that I gained of hard work and dedication and all those things. So moved to St. Louis, raised this family. My parents get pregnant with us. Our parents were married because they were teenage parents. My mother's father was already a preacher, and he was vying to become the pastor of one of the most influential churches in St. Louis. So our mother was pregnant. Her younger sister was pregnant. And he said, I cannot have 2 girls in my house pregnant and unmarried, and I'm trying to do this. One of you all at least has to get married. And the story goes that my aunt looked at my mother and said, well, I hate my son's father. Vicky, it's up to you to marry Jerome. And so my parents got married. Our father, again, didn't graduate high school, went to the military instead. Our grandparents, our father's parents, Genevieve and Jerry, helped our mother raise us. Our mother, again, struggled in general in life, and she was murdered when we were 7 years old. And so our father did not come back into our lives. He did not try to get us. He hand-wrote my grandparents a note and said, Vicky has passed. He didn't use that gracious of language, but Vicky has passed. I give you custody of the boys. You all can raise them. And that was it. And so my grandparents raised my twin brother and I. And they raised us in a household of love and faith. And I know if those who have read the book, I always either begin or end with a statement to my grandparents, to Genevieve and Jerry Carter, for life more abundantly. And I can never say that without getting emotional, because my grandparents were the most important people to me. Point, though, is that if it had not been for them, my life would have turned out extremely different than what it did. So we live in St. Louis. We're raised in an urban community where it's 99.9% African American. People may not have graduated high school, but everybody worked hard, owned their own homes, mowed their lawns, did everything that a a homeowner, good property owner is supposed to do. 14 years old, our father shows up and decides he wants to have a relationship with us. And what do you say to two 14-year-old boys who have been waiting all their lives to be with their dad? Yes, we're going. Interesting thing was the weekend before we moved from St. Louis, Missouri, to a place called Gatesville, Texas, which is a small farming community outside of Waco, Texas, in between Fort Hood, Texas, where our father had been stationed. And when he left the military, he moved to Gatesville. The weekend before we moved, a movie called Colors came out. Any of you all, any recollection of a movie called Colors? Okay, so that movie was about gang life and gang culture in Los Angeles. Have any of you all, by show of hands, heard of Crips or Bloods? I'm not trying to be funny when I ask that question. Okay, that's where that movie popularized that lifestyle. And so, I'm saying this for a reason. The weekend before we leave to move to Gatesville, Colors was released in St. Louis. We saw that movie, and then we moved to Gatesville. Gatesville is a small farming community, primarily white, handful of African American and Mexican people live there. But my twin brother and I excelled. We excelled. We were both really smart. When we graduated, my brother was 4 or 5 out of our class, and I was 11. And I think we had 130, 140 students in our class. My twin brother was the most decorated journalism student in all of Central Texas from our junior year to our senior year. I was an artist. I became an artist, or I knew I was going to be an artist when I was in first grade, kindergarten, first grade. I saw a drawing that my father did and wanted to be like him, even though I didn't know him very well. I decided that I was going to be an artist and had a teacher in high school who helped facilitate that artistic desire and excelled in art. We both played sports, both were lettermen, all those different kind of things. But at 16 years old, I recognize, I understand that God has something more for me to do than just go to church and sit still or sing in the choir or whatever it was. And I understood or recognized the call to ministry. And that's a story unto itself. But at 16 years old, I accepted the call to ministry, and I began to preach when I was 17 years old. I always say that if I could go back to that 16-year-old boy right now and have a conversation with him, I would. Again, I'm laying this foundation. So you have a preacher, you have a genius writer, you have both athletes, everything's good. We graduated from high school. Our relationship with our father was not good at all. He had gotten remarried, we had a stepmother, and she was not a nice person, to say the least. And we ended up leaving Texas immediately after graduating and coming back to St. Louis. So we get back to St. Louis, and things are different. The neighborhood that we had grown up in was no longer, it was still a good neighborhood, but there was something different. What did I say happened the weekend before we left? So gang culture was in full effect 4 years later in St. Louis in our neighborhood, and we didn't fully understand that. All we knew is we wanted to go over to Tandy's. It's a recreational center a block away from the house that we grew up in. We just wanted to go to Tandy's and play basketball, and we had to be aware. Don't wear red when you walk out the house because somebody might shoot you. Don't wear blue when you walk out the house because somebody might shoot you. Don't be out too late because the police are going to get you as well. So if it wasn't gang members, we had to worry about police doing something to us as well. The part of the challenge was the neighborhood that we lived in, again, had previously been outstanding. And I'm not calling it a bad neighborhood, even after Colors came out, but it experiences challenges. And people, when they saw us, all they saw was 2 little black boys, 2 young black men who lived in a particular neighborhood. They didn't know that I was a preacher. They didn't care that I was a preacher. They didn't know that my brother was a graduate number 5. Not only that, he won 3rd place in some national writing contest and got a word process. I mean, they didn't know that I was winning art exhibitions and exhibiting, and they didn't know that we were going to college and that we both had plans for ourselves. They didn't know that we were also working at the same time and being productive. They didn't know about any of those. All they knew was that we were 2 black boys, and people had to try to figure out who we were and what was really going on with us and whether we belonged in whatever space it was that we were in. That becomes a theme of our lives. So we continue to grow up, go to college, excel. I was married. I got married at 21 and was going through a divorce when I was 23 and was struggling to try to figure out how to make ends meet because I was in construction, young, dumb. Construction was not working very well. And I had a mentor who was a police officer, and his life trajectory reflected mine at the same time. So he got married young, was going through a divorce as well. He became a police officer, and it was the best thing that happened for him, outside of having his son, obviously. But it was the best professional decision he made. And so he convinced me that I could do the same thing, and that's what I did. I applied to become a police officer, and I became a police officer in what is called the 3rd District, what used to be called the 3rd District. And at the time, the 3rd District, I was working 11 at night to 7 in the morning. And for the first 3.5 years of my career as a police officer, I was in the busiest district, in the busiest area, in the busiest car. So I led night watch 2 or 3 years in a row on the number of calls I went out to and how many times I had to interact with the public or how many times I wrote reports, all those different kind of things. And this was the first year, and then my 3rd year, were the first and the second time that St. Louis was the most dangerous city in the United States. So I'm working in the most dangerous city, the most dangerous district, in the most dangerous area, in the most dangerous car. I told some people yesterday while we were at dinner that I went one summer and every 4 days I saw somebody lose their life. And that's not hyperbole. I'm not asking for sympathy. That was just a fact of, I went to work last night and I saw a guy get run over by a tractor trailer. I went to work last night and, so it was just interesting. But part of the point though is, in regular day-to-day life, people didn't care that I was a police officer. All they saw was a black man, and they wondered what was going on with this dude. Why is he here in this community? And then they found out I was a police officer, like, oh, okay, you belong here. We want you here. But that was only after they found those things out about me. So I became a police officer. I did that for 5 years and left. And the reason why I left was because my partner planted drugs and stole some money from some people. And I don't say that nonchalantly either. My partner was convicted of violating people's civil rights and ended up spending 5 years in the federal penitentiary based on my testimony. And I don't brag about that either. It's just the reason why I left, because I knew that after telling the truth, I would not be allowed to remain a police officer. Something was going to happen to me, to say the least. Something interesting happened even during all of that. I'm serving as a police officer in that dangerous district. I get invited to become the interim pastor of a church in that district. And I serve as an interim pastor while I am serving as a police officer, again, in that area that I patrolled. Left the police department. Less than 6 months later, I see on the news that the pastor of a church in another part of the district that I patrolled, I used to sit in the parking lot of this church called Broadway Baptist Church. I used to sit in the parking lot of the church and write police reports just because it was a church in my district, in the area that I patrolled. That pastor was killed in the basement of the church by a congregation member that he discipled and baptized. I get a phone call from the first Bible college that I went to, and they said, hey, did you see the news on the television about the pastor that got killed in the basement? Yeah, I did. Well, you can imagine they are having a hard time getting somebody to want to be pastor there. Would you be willing to send them your resume? But I sent them my resume. And literally within the first month, they called me to be their pastor. And so I've served that congregation for 5 years and left after 5 years. Nothing was wrong. I just believed that God sent me there with a purpose to help that congregation during that transitional time, and then moved on to someplace else. And then a few years later, I was called to the church where I am now, which is Webster Groves Baptist Church. Every congregation that I have served as pastor has been a historically white congregation, and that was not the intent at all. I would never have thought that I'd serve in a white congregation. I wanted to serve, or I thought I was going to serve in the congregations where both of my grandfathers served as pastor. So one served as pastor of a church for 24 years, and he died of a heart attack. It's the only reason why he stopped pastoring. And then the other served as pastor of a church in the city of St. Louis as well. And I served under both of them. So I went to college, went to seminary, went to Bible college with the understanding or with the idea that I was going to serve a system faithfully while I did regular work or whatever it was I was doing. And that eventually when they retired, I might have the opportunity to fill in for them in one of their congregations. But the Lord had something different. And like I said, I am currently serving at Webster Groves Baptist Church. The congregation is a wonderful congregation. So I am remarried. My wife is white, which is not a big deal. The point, though, is that I always say that because there are so many things that our relationship has experienced because we are an interracial couple. I have a son from my first marriage that I got full custody of and who I raised as a single father. And my wife, lovingly accepted both of us. And we are a family, and we have our daughter as well, who's biracial. But the point is, you can only imagine the stuff that we have gone through, even in church, as an interracial couple, especially when they invite this guy to the church to come preach. Maybe we want him to become our pastor. And if it's a black church, they're like, wait a minute, what is he coming here with this white girl for? Or if it's an older white congregation, wait a minute, our potential pastor's wife is white? What are we supposed to do with that? And these are all legitimate conversations that I've had to engage with over time. And people ask these questions or have these ideas, these thoughts, not even realizing they have them. So I've served as pastor of 3 white congregations. Webster Groves, ironically, that probably is not the right word, but one of the ironies of me serving at Webster Groves is Webster Groves was created so white people didn't have to worship with black people in Webster Groves. 100-year anniversary, I'm serving as interim pastor, and in the sermon that morning I said, there is an irony that on the 100th anniversary, a black man is standing in the pulpit serving this congregation when it was created to keep black folks away. So not only have I served as the Bible pastor for several years, I am also the executive director, as Pastor Eric said this morning. I'm the executive director of a multi-million-dollar company, and I don't say that trying to be funny at all. We developed $800 million worth of affordable housing. We deploy or we loan out several $1 million worth of funding to small minority and women-owned businesses as well. Full-time professor at one point, writer obviously, and executive director of a couple of other organizations as well. Here's a question. Through all of that, and I'm sorry that that was so long, but I know people wondering about my history. I wanted to give somewhat of a concise thing. What does any of this tell you about my economic standing? What does this tell you about any of my political affiliations? Or what does any of this tell you about any of the social concerns that we may have? Does it tell you anything about any of those things? You could guess, but that would be about it. You're right. Right. What you do know is I was raised by 2 black people that didn't graduate high school, that were a complete generation older than me. But just because they're black, they didn't graduate high school doesn't tell you anything else about them. Just because I'm married to a white woman doesn't tell you anything other than I found a woman who loved me and she just so happened to be white. Just because I've experienced, because I was a police officer, that doesn't tell you anything other than I was a police officer for a very particular point in time. The point of me bringing all this up is I am complicated. And I don't say that trying to be funny, but guess who else is complicated? Whew. Everyone in here is complicated. More complicated than we have time to talk about. The question that I want us to all be thinking about is, how do all these complicated people fit into a system together? How do we fit into this current system of whatever it is? And there's not just one system, but we're going to say the United States. How do we all fit into the life of how this nation functions? How do we all fit into the way this particular state functions, this city functions, this particular community, this particular congregation, or wherever it is you find yourself among other complicated and diverse people? How do we all fit into this conversation together, to these systems together? So why do we need to keep having conversations about race, gender, and economics? Because of recurring political and social events. Police are not going to stop shooting unarmed people, let alone unarmed people of color. And I don't say that trying to be nasty, but it's just going to continue to happen. And when that happens, we're going to have protests. We're going to have all these other different things that occur. So it's going to continue to be at the forefront of our minds and our conversations. And if not ours, the people that we are concerned about, the people that we love, they're going to be thinking about it. And often women, the poor, and people of color feel marginalized and powerless against what they believe are systems that they believe actively harm them. I'm not asking you, do you believe that? I'm not asking that at all. What I'm saying is that is a reality, whether you believe it, whether you agree with it or not. That is a reality, that people wake up every single day and understand that their existence is a threat to someone. And this is not hyperbole. I'm not trying to, I know I don't have to keep qualifying, but people wake up every day. I'll even say it this way. I cannot tell you how many times I've walked into a church and people are like, who are you and why are you here and what do you want? I'm Reverend Doctor. Okay, you belong here. You are okay, versus accepting me and loving me just because I'm a human being walking through the door. And that's not just at churches, but it happens at churches. Like, my wife tells this story on a regular basis, or she jokes about this thing. She talks about the fact that, so like many other people, I can put on the professional voice. The professional voice is not the voice that I was raised with. It was not the lingo, the dialect, the way of speaking English that I was raised with. But I know how to do that because I need to make people feel comfortable when I'm present. That's probably something none of you all or many of you all don't understand. But I have to make sure that people are comfortable, because if I don't make people comfortable with my presence, something literally can happen to me. Again, when the police come through the door, they're not going to stop and go, oh, that's Dr. Carter. They're going to go, that's some dude we have to deal with. But my wife tells the story of how she heard me having a conversation with somebody on the phone, and she could tell I was getting frustrated. But anyway, we get to this next event, and this guy goes, oh, wait a minute. You're Terrell? I thought you were white on the phone. It's like, what? But that's a reality for me. Like, that's something I have to be concerned about. Not just me, my twin brother. My twin brother is a vice president at I'm not going to name the name of the university, but he's the vice president of a university in Missouri, and he's finishing his doctorate as well. So we operate in these worlds that you would think would be, I don't like the word safe, but in these worlds, but we're always reminded on a regular basis. I go to play golf with somebody from the church where I serve as pastor, and I can't tell you how many times we walk into the golf club and people are like, why are you here? Because I want to play 9, that's why. And this friend of mine who goes always, it just reminds him of so I know Terrell in this sense, but I have to realize that other people, this is what happens when Terrell comes, or when people who are different, who are not necessarily expected to be in that space when they show up. Why do we need to continue to have conversations about race? Because it's not just about people of color, it's also about white people. And this is going to be a very generalized conversation. People of color, white people. I'm not saying one is good, one is bad. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is there are different perspectives that everyone comes from. And so we have to acknowledge that white people feel attacked and do not think they have done anything to deserve to be attacked. I want to make sure that we acknowledge that. And just because somebody feels like that doesn't make them bad either. So again, that's not a negative. I have multiple white friends. Wow, that sounds bad. That's like somebody saying, I have multiple black friends. I know people who say, just because I support the police doesn't make me a racist. That is true. Just because somebody supports the police does not make them a racist. Sometimes people will say things in America have gotten better. We had a black president. And I could never even read that without laughing. Did things get better just because we had a black president? No. So what are some of the reasons for the disconnects as it relates to the church? So this is small type. I'm not going to ask you all to read it. I'm going to make sure that this presentation is available for the congregation. So however you would like to do it, for it to be downloaded. So I'm not asking you all to read this. I'm going to read it very briefly, and we're going to have a conversation. Again, what are some of the reasons for this disconnect as it relates to the church and race and gender and economic equality? One is because of individualism. Current evangelical culture, which seems to be the most influential form of Christianity in America, it emphasizes a personal relationship Jesus through intellectual faith. And one of the challenges inherent in this is the idea that the outcomes a person experiences are the results of personal action. So what that means is you are responsible for whatever happens to you. There's no such thing as a system. So you can never blame the system because the system is some theoretical, esoteric idea over here. The only concrete thing that individualism would say exists is you and how you interact with someone else. Another challenge is anti-intellectualism. That's the assumption that critical thinking hinders the gospel message of personal salvation, which can result in a tendency to simplify any argument down to aspects of a person's personal salvation rather than engaging in careful reflection to understand underlying issues more fully, such as historic classism and racism. We cannot get away from the fact that our nation sanctioned slavery. Not a beautiful, not a wonderful, not a good thing. But there are some people who would say, again, that just because we had slavery doesn't affect you now. My question would be, what makes you think that? Have any of you all ever heard of Black Wall Street? I'm going to ask a really all right. So where's that from? Where it in? Tulsa, Oklahoma. And what was Black Wall Street? It was an area of Tulsa, Oklahoma that was owned by black people that was really successful, and white people in the town did not like it. And what did they do? They destroyed the town, or that portion of the town, and killed as many people as they possibly could. Not the first race riot to occur in the United States, but one of the most important and one of the most dramatic. Similar thing happened in East St. Louis. Have any of you all ever heard of the race riot in East St. Louis? Okay, I only see a handful of people shaking their heads out really briefly. East St. Louis, you have St. Louis, you have the river, you have Illinois. I'm sorry, St. Louis, the river, whichever direction it's supposed to be. And East St. Louis is directly across from St. Louis. And there was a shortage of jobs, and instead of looking at the employers who were mistreating employees and who were doing some other unnecessary, immoral, bad tactics, the white people in the town started to take out their anger of a lack of employment on minorities and went and literally set houses on fire and killed hundreds and hundreds of people. There was another similar incident that happened in North Carolina as well, where there was a successful black town. White people hated the success of those black people and literally went in and burned and killed. So something like that happens. How long does it take the black people in that town to recover? Maybe never. So does somebody have an unfair advantage over those black people then? The white people that are left to survive and still in the town or whatever, even though they may be dirt poor themselves, do they have an advantage over those black people who... So part of the point that I'm trying to make is part of the challenge of this kind of thinking is we don't think hard about things. We try to simplify things down to its common denominator or to some common root and say, well, if you were just better, if you just worked harder. I give the example. One of my grandfathers went and fought in the Korean War. What happens when you come back from the Korean War? So you're in the Army. What is one of the benefits that you can get to further your education? Most people don't know this, but black folks were denied the benefits of the GI Bill when they came back from war, and my grandfather was one of those people. So, how hard is it for him, or he's not alive anymore, how hard was it for him coming back, trying to establish himself, versus how hard it was for one of his white... And I'm not saying that they had it perfect. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that life was perfect for them. What I'm saying is when you have systems that are in place historically that have done these things, even if those systems change and no longer do that, this group still has an advantage of history, of accumulated wealth, of accumulated property, and you are just trying to start. Doesn't make these people evil. Didn't say that at all. Didn't say that these people are evil. What I'm saying is that the race, as someone once called it, the race for the future to build family, this group has the advantage, and this group is still trying to dig itself out of a hole. So part of the challenge is anti-intellectualism, where people, especially in current local culture, there's this idea that you can't think too deeply about many of these things because it doesn't help anyone, and it's really not true. It's just ways for people to try to divide each other. Anti-structuralism, an emphasis on personal accountability at the expense of understanding structural effects, what I just talked about. This leads to thinking that whatever may be wrong in a person's life is due solely to personal responsibility, and legal, institutional, or political patterns do not have an effect at all, which is inherently untrue. Biblically based economic freedom, the belief that the Bible teaches personal responsibility, especially as it relates to economic circumstances. From the book Bootstrap Theology, we cover a passage from 2 Thessalonians where Paul says that if a man is not willing to work, he should not eat. 1 Thessalonians, that if a man is not willing to work, he should not eat. And so we have taken that idea that if a person is not willing to give their all and work as hard as they can, then they don't necessarily deserve anything they give, and that if they don't get blessed, then it's their fault. But based on this belief, individual actions carry the greatest influence on a person's economic status, which again is not true. Now again, I am not saying that personal action does not have an effect at all. That's not what I'm saying. But it's not necessarily the thing that has the greatest influence or the only influence on a person's economic status. Another challenge is consumerism, the view that the church as an institution should cater to a person's individual needs and spiritual preferences. That's why we all go to the church that we go to, right? Because they do it the way we want to do it. We want it done because they entertain us, because they sing the right amount of songs that we want to hear and the style, and it's all about us. A person may choose a church that best suits their preferences and then change churches whenever another church better suits them. Part of the challenge with that, though, is it becomes the focus is on you versus what is this kingdom building work that God has called all of us to do first and foremost. The early church didn't have a bunch of house churches. Well, they had house churches, but they didn't have a bunch of different types of worship services to go to. They went and sat with each other and loved, worked, shared, communed, did all those things together. And it was about, as Luke, the writer of Acts, says, they had all things in common and they were working for the betterment of the entire community. There's also this other worldly focus. Mark Knoll, who's a famous professor and historian, a Christian historian, says, a fascination with heaven while slighting attention to earth, a devotion to the supernatural and a neglect of the natural. Part of this challenge is that we focus on heaven and this afterlife. Like that's the point of becoming a Christian, right? That's the point of the gospel. So that's part of the challenge that I'm pushing back against with this book, The Gospel According to Broadway. We have whittled the gospel down to a formula. If I am contrite enough and I pray a specific prayer, God will forgive my sins and I'll go to heaven, and I can't wait to get to heaven. What does it say that that's what the purpose is in the Bible? The purpose that we hear from Jesus alone is do good right here. Take care of God's creation right now. Love the people that you come in contact with right now. Do good by them. Don't focus on what the future, there's a future. God has a future for all of us, but that's not what the focus is. And the point again is that this is part of the challenge today, is that we have now made that the primary focus. Going to heaven and getting away from here versus loving God's creation and living in this moment of God's kingdom being built, coming into existence in the here and now. And this begs the questions, are the earth and human relationships temporary or eternal? And the way a person answers that question tells you a lot, because if they are temporary, then I don't have to worry about what happens now. I can treat the earth the way I want to. I can treat people the way I want to, because I don't have to deal with them anyway. But if they are eternal, then I have to have a different focus on them, like God would have me to focus. And almost finally, biblical illiteracy. Americans revere the Bible but are biblical illiterates. A Gallup survey found that less than half of Americans can name the first Less than half of Americans can name the first book of the Bible. Only a third know that Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount, and 60% cannot name half of the Ten Commandments. All right, I won't hold that against anybody. If you can't name all the Ten Commandments, or if you can't name the first 5, I'm not mad at you, because that's a lot to digest in itself. But the point, though, is that the Bible has become a tool for us versus it becoming a document or a gift from God that helps to guide our lives. We use it as a tool to get what we want out of it, to get people to do what we want them to do, and then we claim that God is okay with that. Dr. Noel goes on, Catherine and William, Dr. Breckus and Dr. Gilpin say this: yet, despite this current knowledge deficit, the Bible remains the central book of America's cultural and intellectual heritage. So how many times have you heard somebody quote the Bible? And I mean, they're a political figure, but they always quote it in a way that makes whatever it is they are pushing the right thing to do. I'll give an example that's even more current, or even more. There's a pastor in Dallas who was a fan of a particular politician, and this pastor was extolling the virtues of fighting back, of getting back at your enemies, getting back at your political opponents, and making sure that their faces are rubbed in the dirt. And the reporter said, wait a minute, Jesus said, if somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek. Well, I don't have to do what Jesus said. Wow. Let that sink in for a second, though. This is a popular, influential pastor who says, I don't have to do that because it doesn't fit my political philosophy. It doesn't fit whoever. And again, this doesn't tell you whether I voted for any particular politician or not. What this does tell you, though, is I believe that we have to be much more careful and much more intentional about how we navigate these kind of conversations and what the Bible says. Instead of being influenced by clear biblical teachings first, there's a trend in which political philosophies have begun to influence personal and corporate theology instead of it being the other way around. And one of the fastest growing political theologies is Christian nationalism. By a show of hands, how many of you all have heard of the phrase Christian nationalism before? All right, so there are some of you all who have not heard it. Christian nationalism draws its roots from Old Testament parallels between America and Israel, who was commanded to maintain cultural and blood purity, often conquest and separatism. Are there any words in there that make you pause when you read them? Like, just yell out, what are some of the words that make you pause? Most of them, right? But does anybody notice, what is the focus of this definition? What is the focus of, if this is the correct definition, what is the focus of Christian nationalism? So, I'm sorry, blood purity through war. Somebody else said something? Being white. Ooh. Okay, why do you say that then? Because you're the first person who said that to me out loud as well. I mean, in crowd, yeah. For those who are online, she said, me? We should talk more often. Somebody else. Did somebody else have? What are some of the words that cause pause as you read this? Conquest and just everything. Yeah. So when you read the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, depending on how you read it, you could possibly come away with that God created a group of people that God wanted to have for God's self, and that God sent them into a particular area and told them to wipe a gang of people out so they could receive the promise that God gave them. I'm not saying that that's the right interpretation. I'm not saying that that's the wrong interpretation. All I'm saying is that some people are able to interpret the Bible that way. What does that look like when you bring that to the 21st century, though? What does that look like when you bring it to the 21st century in America? It looks like a lot like what we have. The primary underlying tool of this current form of Christian nationalism is fear. Anybody hear any politicians nowadays talking about fear? Anybody hear any preachers nowadays talking about fear and framing everything through a fear lens? Fear of the other, fear of how our nation has changed for the worse due to the inclusion of the other, fear of how the inclusion of the other will continue to negatively affect the future of our nation. We have to keep our nation pure, just like God told Israel to keep their tribe pure, right? And if we don't, then God is going to punish us. And there's one last thing that I want to bring up very quickly, and then we're going to just start having a conversation. And hopefully these things that I have brought up, we can go back to any of them at any time, but hopefully they will serve as part of the foundation for this conversation. Is there anybody in here who has not heard the word critical race theory before? It's one of the hottest topics around, isn't it? They're banning books all over again? Does that sound like America? They're banning books because you're portraying our nation in the wrong way. Like it should be against the law. Not only are they banning books, they have now made laws where you cannot teach critical race theory in classes because it makes the United States look bad. We've made ourselves look bad. The books don't. When you are just giving history, the history just tells what happened. Critical race theory is a long-standing academic framework used to explain how social, legal, political systems have been used to help certain people groups in America make economic, political, and social progress while simultaneously hindering others. The primary pushback against the theory is that Marxism is part of its foundation, thus making it atheistic. Is Marxism atheistic? The point is, I won't say the point is. Well, the point is, if you can find one negative thing about something that scares everyone else, then you've won. Does anybody care about Marxism right now? Is Marxism is communism still the bastion that's going to tear down the United States like we thought it was? Okay, so China. Yeah. Oh, I get what you're saying, but is that what's going to tear America down? That's what my question is. Okay. Okay. So is that China's fault, or is that Walmart's fault? Because Walmart is. So I am open to having this kind of conversation, and I welcome it. I just want to make sure that it's a conversation. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. So do you mind? Well, I was about to ask you your name. You might not want everybody to know your name. So the question I asked was, is communism the thing that is going to destroy America? And one response was essentially, it possibly could. You didn't say yes, but you're giving examples of how it could. And somebody responded back and said, what was your response?
I said that corporations gave jobs to China, 70% of them were to China. So China did not steal the jobs. China accepted the jobs that further corporations.
And the question still is, how does communism, that's economics.
Right.
That's economics, that's not communism. But you were saying something? I'm sorry, capitalism, thank you. Capitalism, economics, some people would say they're all the same. But that's capitalism, and we are the bastion of capitalism. We're the bastion of capitalism, yes, well. Greed and division. Do you want to explain a little more? Corporate greed? Okay, so I want to make sure that the people who are listening online hear. So corporate greed, the division in wages and things like that leads to struggles that our nation is experiencing. Is that what you're saying? And focusing on the stockholder, what does that mean? Okay, focusing on profits. Well, but is it wrong to want to make profit? Okay, so no, not at the expense of others. Go ahead, yes, sir. So there's an assumption that I'm more important than someone else. I'm American, they're Chinese. Please continue. But aren't we both equal? You all tell me. So like I did this morning, my goal is to ask questions, not necessarily to give the answer, because as I said a few moments ago, you all have the answer. The question is, are you willing to engage in the conversation in such a way that it leads you to creating the answers that are given or need to be found or to be followed on. Let me give one last slide really quickly. Why has critical race theory become a lightning rod? I think it relates to the discomfort that comes with the subjects discussed by critical race theory. There are multiple things, I think, but this is the simplest. Is nobody wants to be told, like, this is what has gone wrong in the past. Nobody wants to be told this is how you or how people in your community have acted before, because it makes you feel like you're receiving the blame for it. And the point of critical race theory, and again, this does not tell you whether I believe in critical race theory or not. This does not tell you whether I like critical race theory or not. What I'm saying is that I understand that there's discomfort in the conversation because people feel like they are being attacked as it relates to it. So the question I always ask is, how do we have the conversation without it seeming like we're attacking somebody? I'm not backing away from the discomfort. I'm not backing away from the truth of whatever is being told. How do we have the conversation in a way that people don't feel like I'm attacking you, especially for something that you may not necessarily have done? And just because you may feel something different than me or believe something different than me doesn't make you my enemy either. So how do we start having these conversations in a way that are legitimate conversations and not this the very first slide or the second slide where it's I'm entrenched in my position and you're entrenched in your position, and all we care about is over talking each other. What does all this mean for the church? That's what I want us to start talking about right now. We have, oh good Lord, that was longer than I anticipated. We got about a half hour to figure this all out. So let's have a conversation together about the things that and these are just the tip of the iceberg, the things that you all have just brought up as well. Let's start having a conversation. And what does all of that mean for this particular location? And if you want to start sharing the mic, I want us to have a conversation. Again, my privilege is not to tell you all how to fix all this. My privilege is to bring up questions, to bring up concerns, ask the question, how do you all plan on, what are the ways for you all to navigate this in this particular context? What is this community like? What is Crystal Lake like? Somebody describe Crystal Lake to me, please. White, okay. Very white, all right. That's not a bad thing, though. That is not necessarily a bad thing. So one of the things I say to people when we start to have kind of conversations is, we do focus a lot, and with good reason, we focus a lot on the relationships between people of different races, ethnicities, colors, whatever we want to talk about. But we also have to remember that sometimes that may not be the best or the first area of diversity that we can focus on. I'll give an example. So my wife is from a small farming. I'm going to step over to the mic over here since we're done with the screen. Does that work? Test. All right. My wife is from a small farming community like my grandparents' community down in the southeast area of Missouri. And she comes from a town of less than 1,000 people. And there really are no black folks that live there. That's not because the people in that community are hateful. That's just because of a place that black folks apparently don't want to live. And so we can't hold that lack of racial diversity against them, because it's not something that they asked for that I know of. Now, I might do some history and find out, whatever, but it's an area that apparently does not attract many people of color. Now, I will say this. So when we first started dating 20 plus years ago, I did not see any black folks, and it took probably our first 5 years of dating and being married before I counted 10 minorities, not black folks, 10 minorities. That meant black, brown, Korean, all those different kinds of things. And it has changed over time, even more so now, because interracial relationships have occurred down there. People have adopted black and brown children. So the diversity is starting to be there. But I always say again, like, just because there's not a physical racial diversity does not mean something's wrong with that community. Diversity may need to be first sought in a different area. Does that make sense? Okay, so I brought that up because what did somebody describe Crystal Lake? White, very white. How else would you describe Crystal Lake? Yes, ma'am. Is there a reason why there's such economic difference? That's a really broad question, but I'm trying to understand. What is the economic engine, or is there an economic engine in Crystal Lake? Yes, ma'am.
So, the average income in Henry is about $80,000, average household income. But we do have Section 8 housing, and there are some, camper,
Trailers.
trailer homes, thank you. And so most of those are where minorities live.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a difference between those, and it's a big difference, but I would say most of them are fairly.
That's really interesting. So why do you think that, so you're saying that in this trailer, I'm just going to use a really general term, in the trailer park, you were more likely to find African Americans or people of color than anyone else? Is that what you're saying? Oh, mostly Hispanics. Okay, so all right. Is there a reason for that? Do you think? What would be the reason? What do you mean by jobs or property taxes? And please, again, use the mic because we want to make sure that those who are online can still hear as well.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can
Okay.
hear.
So, I'm sorry, what was the question?
So what do you think is the reason why you would find more Hispanics at the trailer park?
Jobs.
And what do you mean by that?
Lack of jobs. There's not a lot of manufacturing. It's building, but and education. So we're aiming to get more of the manufacturing and other jobs, but most of the people that live here commute out of our county and are white-collar jobs.
Okay. So I'm going to ask some questions that are probably going to sound like I'm probing, but they are. So does nobody else want manufacturing jobs? Are we only saying Hispanics want manufacturing jobs? Okay.
No, not at all.
No. So I'm just asking for clarity, so I'm not accusing you of anything. Why do we think that they are so you're saying that because of the economic status of people within that community, that is the reason why they are staying in the trailer park, or one of the influencing factors for them staying in the trailer park?
Is income.
Okay.
Yeah, income.
Does anybody else have a response to that? Anybody else have any thoughts? It doesn't matter to me who, but just please use the microphone. I'm sorry, Pastor Eric, you're about to get a workout, sir.
This is more of an observation than an answer. I'm a Virginia transplant to Chicago, to a transplant to Crystal Lake. And what really struck me when I moved here was that the white folks literally whispered the word Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that translates in a lot of ways, but if you can't even say the word Mexican out loud, it speaks volumes, so to speak, about how we want to exist with other people.
It speaks volumes in what ways? Give more clarification, please.
Well, so I'm a poet, so I speak in metaphors, so forgive me, but I think when you can't say something out loud, it is almost as if you don't want it to exist.
Okay. Does anybody I'm going to give somebody an opportunity to have a response to that. Anybody have a response to that? Okay. Go ahead.
Not really a response to that, but to the basic. Early on, you asked us how many of us had contact with or considered friends that were different from us. And I think there's a degree of that within the Hispanic communities. They are comfortable with their neighbors who are most like them. Most like them economically, most like them language, most like them in habits, holidays, celebrations, way of life. And I think to that extent, there is a separation there, some also.
Yep. Okay. And thank you for saying that, because I don't know if you all can pick up some of the things that I'm doing. I'm trying not to give a whole lot of opinion. I'm giving opinion, but I'm trying to also not give necessarily a whole lot of opinion. But yeah, some of it may be economics, but some of it may be this is the culture of that particular people group where they prefer to live. I'll give you an example. So when I was a police officer, ended up arresting a guy, and my partner, this older white guy, and this guy had a wad of cash under a couch. And my partner accused this guy of selling drugs because nobody in their right mind puts money under a couch. Everybody puts their money in the bank or in a savings account. Does anybody know? Say again? Whew. My grandfather, I can say this, he's passed and the house is, not what it was. But anyway, they used to keep wads of cash underneath the linoleum in the kitchen because they wanted to be able to get to it in case of an emergency. Not like something negative but oh no, somebody had a car accident and we need to get the car fixed now. Or the kids, like Terrell was dumb enough to fall over and bust his head. I have a scar right here and we need to go down to the hospital and we need to just pay for his surgery right now. And so when I tried to explain that to my partner, he was like, what? He had never heard that idea before. It's like my grandparents, they have bank accounts, but they don't trust banks. So they keep most of their cash at home, let alone. So some of that, the point though is that some of that is cultural, and it's economic, but some of it's cultural. Yes, ma'am.
So I just bought a house in Crystal Lake during the pandemic and still have a home in Chicago in Humboldt Park in the Latino community where I happily lived for 40, 50 years. In fact, enjoying being around people who play Puerto Rican music and eating my Puerto Rican food, so there's some truth in that. But when I looked up Crystal Lake, I saw a statement that one of its problems was immigration. Oh. Right? And so if that's the way folks talk about immigration, that it is a problem, that tells you something about kind of what Wendy suggested.
So and I believe that I talked about it in this book, there's a statement that the Bible clearly makes, that God told Israel, when Israel landed in the promised land, in this new land that God gave to them, or they believe God gave to them, or told their ancestors, when you enter to this new land, do A, B, C, D, but also don't do C, D, E, F, G. And what you were not to do is you weren't to hoard all of the resources. You were to leave things on the outside, the periphery, for widows, orphans, immigrants. Would that be a word that fits that spot as well? And God clearly said, in no uncertain terms, I'm not quoting this verbatim, but this is essentially what God says, treat strangers, immigrants, well, because at one point you were one of them. And we seem to forget that here in the United States, don't we? I'm sorry. Anyway, please, somebody else jump in right now. Somebody else jump in right now before we get too deep down that hole. But that's a political ideology, though. This gets back to that Christian nationalism where God is for us and against everyone else. Are we the only nation that God loves? Are we the only community that God loves? The only people that God loves? Yes, sir.
I would like to speak again to the Latino.
Okay, please.
We don't know a whole lot of them, but many of them have started their own business and take care of people's yards. One of them, mine. The guy who does it is my friend now. Every once in a while I get him to stop and have a beer. He brought his kids over to show us. But they are not lazy people. and they are lovely people to have in the community.
So where do we get this idea from? Where do we get this idea that, so I'm just going to use, since these are the last two examples, that people from those particular ethnicities are late. Where do we get that? And why does that continue to be the perception? So what did our president, I'm sorry, just to say, what was the first thing he said when he announced his candidacy for president? Wow. And did anybody push back against that? Did anybody push back to fight against him and to say, hey, I'm a Republican as well, but we can't do that. That's not cool. We didn't even have anybody. Yes, sir, go ahead.
You asked where the idea of pick those people being lazy or indolent or anything else comes from. A large part of that is hiring practices. I know that historically, post Reconstruction, there was a large push of, if you don't hire former slaves and you make not working illegal, you can get them into prisons, and then they become slaves again.
I talk about that in the book. I'm sorry, because this is about to be, hey, I wrote a book about that, and that's not what my intent is. In the book, Police on a Pedestal, Responsible Policing and a Culture of Worship, I outline what the political justice system was designed to do for minority cultures. So I use St. Louis as the example. In St. Louis, the police department started from the settlers who settled along the Mississippi and took the land from Native Americans. They then hired people to protect those settlers from the Native Americans who tried to regain their land. And then that continued to, we have African Americans who have been freed. We don't want them to be free anymore. And we will make, there was a law in the books in Missouri that says, well, actually in the entire United States, but also Missouri, that says if a black person was found gadding about, does anybody know what gadding about means? If you were found gadding about and could not prove that you had a job, that you were headed to your job, you would be arrested and returned to slavery, literally. But this goes back to this idea of systems that we think do not exist. They do. But I want to make sure that this is not just what does this mean for the context here in Crystal Lake? So we're talking about what it sounds like is perceptions of people, perceptions of a group of people. How do we change that perception? How do we then start to build relationships with those people so the perceptions are not either so much stronger, or we are now able to cross lines where we see people's value, they see our value, and it's no longer just a contentious kind of, you're over there in the trailer park and I'm over here in a 6-bedroom home. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I guess I was going to say, before that question, a big thing that we had here in the past 2 years, we had an ICE facility. So our sheriff's, the jail, had a whole floor that we detained immigrants.
Wow.
And it was a 2-year argument and fight where people would come and speak at public comment and try to get the county board to stop the contract. And our county board voted no, we would not stop the contract. And it took the state legislature to do this. And it was these groups that would come to our meetings, come to all the other meetings, write their legislators, and finally got this passed. And this was done, the last person left our facility less than a month ago.
Oh, wow.
So the fact that you have Hispanics who, even if they're legal, are scared to drive down the street and get pulled over, are scared to go to their jobs, scared to go to the food pantries, go collect food stamps, any of that is a big major factor in this. Mm-hmm. So going to your question, the fact that I don't want to say we, but people have helped them step up and feel confident to talk and to talk to different people, have these conversations. And that, I think that's a big thing, is having these conversations and realizing we're just normal people. We're all normal people. And we all have the same concerns. We all have families. We all want jobs and be successful. So I think that's a good starting point, but this is also fresh that it's really hard to get people to keep going.
And it's not just fresh, it's also, again, like, how do we navigate this? Like, this is my America. This is my Crystal Lake. This is my 400 block of Broadway. This is mine, and you have not earned, which is part of the challenge that we talk about in the book. We have this idea that people have to earn their right to be present with us. We never say that we have to earn right, or I've earned the right and I've done what I have thought. I never asked somebody else what I've had to do to earn right. It was automatically told to me, it was automatically made available to me, and I had certain benefits. And I'm not saying that about white people. Like, I was born in the United States. I have friends who live in Cuba. I've been to Cuba twice, Guatemala, Bucharest, Romania, Burma, Myanmar, Warsaw, Poland, and I always forget, there's a sixth place I've been to. And every time I go overseas, I go to teach leaders, indigenous leaders, and I go over there to consult with educational institutions. And every time I come back, I am so grateful that I was born in the United States. Not that those places are not wonderful, not that they are not blessed, not that they are not faithful. I'm not saying any of that. But it is very clear to me every time I walk away how grand and outstanding my life is, how I have so many things that I take for granted. We have these things, and we can buy these like bubble gum. You know, they don't have access to, this is the epitome of how convenient our lives are. And again, I don't say that in a negative way, but my friends are trying to figure out, like, hey, you all are complaining about masks over there. We can't even get a vaccine. And so, and our conditions are worse than yours. Like, we don't get to see a doctor on a regular basis. We don't have antibiotics on a regular basis. And you all are complaining about masks. We wish that's, so again, this idea of we we think that we have earned the right to receive what we have, not realizing that we are already ahead of the game in so many ways than other people in other circumstances, other situations. All right, so back to the question again. So, Crystal Lake, what needs to happen here? What could happen? What could Crystal Lake look like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now?
I think where we have to start is having an honest, open conversation that is not predicated in fear. Because when you think about it, the whole critical race theory right now that they're banning books and they are basically saying it can't be taught is fear-based. And really, let's face it, this is not a theory, this is fact. But if we can, for me personally, my realization, like driving here today, I had absolutely I could tell you every thought that went through my head driving here today. The one that never crossed my mind was what color skin I was driving here. It never occurred to me. I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry when I go into a store at 11 o'clock at night to go get something, what color my skin is. When I got pulled over a few months ago, I didn't have to worry about having my hands on 10 and 2. So just Crystal Lake, people, being honest and starting from there. I mean, and even though, I came from immigrant great-grandparents and whatever, and they came over with nothing. But you know what? Their nothing turned into things, and they were able to keep it. Whereas someone I will call a dear friend of mine, her great-grandfather was a very well-to-do owner of a store in central Indiana, and he was told by somebody, you need to leave because they're going to come and kill you and your family because your business was doing too well, and there is a white gentleman who wants to prosper and they're going to kill you. And he had to leave with his family in the middle of the night and head to Chicago with nothing and start all over again. My great-grandparents never had to worry about that. They didn't have to do that. They bought property and they passed it on to my grandparents and my parents. And so just, I think for me, Crystal Lake people, to realize that maybe is the place to start.
Somebody else? We have about 10 minutes left, and so I want this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, I'm talking.
You're good.
Terrell, I told you yesterday that I'm new to Christianity, and I walked into this church thinking, the minute I see hypocrisy, I'm out of here. And I told you last night I didn't see it, and I thought about that a lot over the course of the evening, and it's probably just not true. I don't think that we are that pious. But you had mentioned earlier while you were talking about your slides that you don't like the word safe, and I was wondering why, and this conversation has led me to a possibility, which is if we all remain safe in our little bubbles, whether they be individual or community, we can't have conversations like this that get to some of the realizations that Lene just explained.
So that's part of it. That's part of it. The other part is that word has been politicized, just like critical race theory has been politicized. Critical race theory is a theory, an academic theory, that has been around a long time. But what history shows us is, so I'm sorry, let me make sure I'm answering your question. So that is part of it, yes. The other part is the word safe has been co-opted to mean something else. And so, again, if I'm having honest conversations with people, I don't want it to become politicized. I want people to just be able to say whatever it is they want to say, but I want it to be done in a way that they understand that I'm not attacking them and I don't want them attacking me. We can have arguments, we can have discussions, we can have disagreements, just as long as we're being respectful with each other. That's all that matters. But back to the politicization, what I've learned is over time, whenever these kind of things happen and certain portions of our society are trying to regain power, then they politicize even the simplest thing, because in focusing on that, you're not focusing on everything else over here that's going on and that has happened, or that we're already trying to do or planning to do or already have in motion, and we're trying to keep you focused on that versus these other things that need to be addressed as well. So yes, ma'am, please.
So I'm really brand new here, so I'm just gonna be unsafe and put it out there and say that Wendy has been really lovely to me, and I moved in next door quite accidentally to members of this church who had signs against the ICE stuff and Black Lives Matter, and I was so thrilled that those were going to be my neighbors, and then to find out they went to church here was great. And I will say, as a Puerto Rican who's light-skinned and whose mom is white and whose Puerto Rican father's light-skinned, I know that I get to walk through the world as a white woman, but it also means I get to hear a lot of stuff that people wouldn't say out loud if they knew my name was Juanita Irizarry. And I went to good white Christian college, which actually, Terrell, you and I have Greenville University in common. And so I know really well, I have fancy education in addition to that, and I know how to walk in white world quite well. I was extremely successful at Greenville, et cetera. But what I've taken away from looking back at my time at Greenville is that I walked
news, and he made comments about our watching MSNBC and what kind of people they were, and various things. I won't confront
Over here, find out that these white people were talking about this. Like, wait a minute, you all should have been inviting us to this conversation. They got invited to the conversation. So what started out with one turned into 12 or 13 congregations that began to work together collectively to heal personal relationships and communal relationships. It took about 1.5 years, and what ended up happening was they ended up making a marker in honor of that last lynching and helped to bring some healing, notoriety is not the right word, but made sure people understood and how that affected the community and what they planned on doing to move forward. And that group is still working together today. Now, everything didn't go perfectly, so don't think I'm saying that. No, guess what happened after they had that historical marker, installed? Within 2 days, somebody defaced it and tried to destroy it. So people who are trying to do good in the neighborhood are still, there's always going to be somebody who's trying to destroy the reconciling work that we participate in. The point that I'm trying to make is that this is not a one-off, or cannot be, or if this is a one-off thing, this is not going to go anywhere. So my challenge for you all is figure out how to continue to engage in conversation. And maybe that conversation is, here goes everything that's wrong for the first couple of meetings. But every meeting, ask the question, what is one thing that we can do? One thing is, I can invite my Hispanic lawn service person out to lunch and just say, hey, you pray for just a moment, please. God, we are thankful. Hard conversations are just that, very, 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 very hard. And they are confusing, they're emotional, they are disheartening, but they can also, Lord, be encouraging in the sense that we can say things that need to be said, we can feel things that you want us to feel, to experience. And we can be reminded, Lord, through your Holy Spirit of how you can intervene and how you can make things better. Amen. Thank you all so much for spending time together. Thank you all for just engaging in conversation. As I said, there are copies of the book, The Gospel According to Broadway. The point of the book is to address this idea of, in this contemporary church context, we, in my understanding, have tried to whittle the gospel down to a formula that if I pray a prayer, say I'm sorry, then I'm going to go to heaven. And God's relationship with God's creation is much more broader, expansive, more important, more complicated than that. And so that's what this book is about, and we explore that idea through gospel stories. And if you want a copy of it, a donation of any size would be welcome. And do you have anything else, Pastor Eric?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you again all so much for coming here tonight. For some of the ongoing work that we are doing in this congregation, we have our Anti-Racism Task Force that's been gathering and meeting for 18 months, I want to say, about 18 months. So thank you to them and our Anti-Racism Task Force. If you're on that task force, would you raise your hand now? So if you're interested in engaging in more of these conversations, more of this work from where our congregation is, talk to any of those folks that are here. We're always looking for more folks to begin continue this hard work in these hard conversations. But so grateful for you all for being here. And once again, Dr. Carter, Terrell, we're so grateful that you came. And please join me in thanking you. I turned it off too soon. And then Dr. Carter, I believe, will be here for a little bit. If you have questions or comments or things like that you want to ask him while you come up and buy a book for yourself and for your neighbors and for your relatives and all of that. But also just apply.